She lay motionless in the dirt just inches from the roaring highway, her thin frame trembling with every blast of wind from passing trucks. Dust clung to her spotted fur. Her sides rose and fell in shallow, desperate breaths. One amber eye blinked slowly, the other fixed on nothing. The jagged edge of a broken canine caught the dim light as her mouth opened, a faint hiss escaping before her strength failed. She was only a young bobcat, barely 6 months old. Yet she looked as if she had been fighting to survive for years. The driver saw her, too late to stop completely. Tires screeched, gravel scattered. When he stepped out, she didn't try to run, only flinched as if bracing for a final blow. Her ribs were sharp beneath her fur, her paws caked with dry mud. Every movement seemed to drain what little energy she had left. The man hesitated, knowing she was wild, dangerous if cornered. But the sight of her swaying, barely upright, left no room for second thoughts. He took off his jacket, speaking softly, edging closer until he could wrap the fabric around her fragile body. Fought, weak but furious, hissing and twisting as if the sound alone could drive away the human scent. Her heart pounded against his arms, a rapid, frantic rhythm. The drive to the nearest wildlife rehabilitation center felt endless. Every bump in the road made her flinch, and once she tried to bite through the fabric, but her jaw trembled, and she gave up. When they arrived, the rescue team rushed her inside. The center was small, a rural facility in Flagstaff, Arizona, more accustomed to handling stray dogs than a wild bobcat. The staff exchanged quick, concerned looks. No specialist for wild cats was on hand, but they had no choice but to act. A vet in scrubs knelt beside the table, gloved hands moving with practiced speed. Severe dehydration, malnourished, dental trauma. See the broken canine, he murmured to an assistant. They placed an 4 there. Voices calm but urgent, every movement deliberate. Even in her weakness, she lashed out, claws scraping the towel beneath her. No one could tell if she would survive the night. Outside the treatment room, the steady hum of kennels filled with barking dogs echoed against the walls. This place was meant for them, not for her. But for now this was all she had. Somewhere down the row of kennels, 2 young puppies pressed their faces to the bars, curious at the smell of a new arrival. They didn't know yet how close their lives were about to intertwine with the wild creature fighting for hers. The first night was a blur of shadows and muted sounds. In the dim light of the recovery room, the young bobcat lay, curled beneath a thin blanket, her ears twitching at every noise. The 4-line ran from her fore to a slow dripping bag above her head. Her breathing was shallow, but the steady rhythm gave the staff a fragile sense of hope. Every few hours, a vet would step in, check her vitals, and leave just as quietly, careful not to provoke the wild energy still lingering behind her half-closed eyes. She had no name yet. To the staff, she was simply the bobcat, though one volunteer whispered that she deserved something better. Her coat, even dulled by neglect, was a beautiful tapestry of tawny gold and black rosettes, the kind that melted into desert brush and pine shadows. Her long, tufted ears twitched at the faintest sound, betraying her alertness, even in exhaustion. The broken canine told a silent story, a fight she had lost, or perhaps one she barely escaped. When they tried to feed her, she refused anything offered by hand, turning her head sharply or letting the meat fall untouched. But when the room was quiet and no human eyes were watching, the food would slowly disappear. It was survival, not trust. Her world had taught her that every approach was a threat. By the second day, she could stand though. Unsteady, she paced the small enclosure, testing every inch of the metal bars. Her movements tense, restless. The staff knew the pacing wasn't energy. It was stress. The caged frustration of a creature born to roam miles of rugged land. But she was too weak for anything else, and the outside world would have been a death sentence in her current state. At night, when the center fell silent, the distant barking of dogs seeped into her room. She would freeze, her head low, eyes narrowing. It wasn't fear. It was calculation. Her instincts told her to stay hidden, to wait, to watch. Somewhere deep inside, the wildness was untouched, coiled tight, like a spring. She did not yet know that in the days ahead this noisy, unfamiliar place would change her life, and that beyond the walls of her cage, another heartbeat was waiting, one that would draw her into a bond neither wild nor tame could explain. On the third morning, the center's routine began as usual. Bowls clattering, water hoses running, the steady chorus of barks echoing through the kennels. The bobcat sat pressed against the far corner of her enclosure, her golden eyes following every movement. Beyond the bars, she had grown used to the sounds of dogs, but that didn't mean she welcomed them. Down the row, too, young Labrador Retriever puppies tumbled over each other in a burst of playful energy. Barely 3 months old, their glossy coats, one deep black, the other a warm yellow, shone under the fluorescent lights. They had arrived just days earlier, rescued from an abandoned backyard on the outskirts of Flagstaff. Despite their rough start, they carried none of the bobcat's suspicion. The world to them was still a place full of new friends. When the staff brought the bobcat her morning meal, the yellow pup darted forward, stopping just outside her cage. His head tilted, ears perked as if he had stumbled upon the most fascinating thing he had ever seen. The black pup bounded up beside him, tail wagging. The bobcat's response was immediate, a sharp, guttural hiss, ears flat against her skull, the muscles in her shoulders tensing like coiled wire. The pups froze, startled, but not frightened. The staff moved them along, chuckling softly, but the yellow Labrador lingered a few steps longer, his gaze fixed on her as if he didn't believe her warning. The bobcat watched him go, her eyes narrowing before she turned back to her food. Later, when the kennels quieted for the midday lull, the yellow pup returned alone. This time, he padded right up to her cage and sat down. No barking, no jumping, just stillness. Rose to her feet, moving with deliberate slowness toward the bars. Her whiskers twitched, and for a moment their eyes locked. She broke the gaze first, turning away with a flick of her tail. But the pup stayed, silent and patient, as if he knew something the rest of the world didn't. Day after day, the yellow Labrador returned to the same spot outside her cage. At first, the bobcat treated him no differently than the others, a threat to be warned away. Hisses came low and sharp, her body rigid, tail lashing with irritation. Yet the pup never barked, never paw at the bars. He would simply sit, head slightly tilted, his warm brown eyes steady and unafraid. On the 5th morning, something shifted. The bobcat was pacing when she caught sight of him. Through the corner of her vision, stopped mid-step, ears twitching, and instead of retreating to her corner, she moved closer. The space between them narrowed until only the cold metal separated fur from fur. The Labrador didn't move, didn't blink. Her whiskers brushed the bars, and for a heartbeat, the tension in her shoulders eased. The staff noticed. She's calmer when he's here, one volunteer whispered. They began allowing the pup to linger during cleaning times, watching closely for signs of stress. What they saw instead was a subtle change, less pacing, less frantic glances toward the door. By the end of the week, the Bobcat no longer greeted him with bared teeth. She would remain still, ears forward, observing him with the same intensity she once reserved for threats. When he yawned and lay down, his paws stretching toward her cage, she leaned just close enough for the tips of her whiskers to touch the air between them. It wasn't trust, not yet, but the wild edge in her eyes was softening. She began to eat more consistently, her body filling out, the sharp ridges of her ribs slowly fading beneath her coat, and always at the edge of her recovery was the yellow lab, silent and watchful, as if he had appointed himself her guard. She didn't understand his persistence. She didn't yet know that his presence was quietly dismantling the walls she had built to survive. One afternoon, while the yellow Labrador lay in his usual spot outside her cage, the black Labrador puppy trotted over, curious about this silent ritual. He pressed his nose to the bars, tail thumping against the floor. The Bobcat's ears flicked back, a low hiss rumbling in her chest. She stepped forward anyway, her movements slow and deliberate, eyes locked on the smaller black pup. The yellow lab shifted slightly, almost as if to block his sibling. But the black pup didn't retreat. He gave a short whine, not out of fear, but in an attempt to speak in the only way he knew. The Bobcat's gaze moved between them, her muscles taut, her wildness simmering just beneath the surface. From across the room, two staff members watched, their voices hushed. "She's just a baby," one murmured, her eyes soft with pity. 6 months old and already so broken. She must have been through hell. Another sighed, shaking his head. "It's like she doesn't believe the world can be safe anymore." They had seen her up close, felt the raw energy of her fear. Every time a hand came too near, she recoiled. Every sound made her flinch. She was beautiful, fierce, and heartbreakingly small. No bigger than these pups, who still stumbled over their own paws, but her eyes held the weight of survival. The yellow pup stayed pressed to the bars, head low in quiet solidarity. The black one eventually lay beside him, their bodies forming a warm line of comfort she didn't know she needed. Her gaze lingered on them longer than usual, her tail no longer twitching in irritation. For the staff, it was a fragile, extraordinary thing to witness. The Labrador puppies trying to bridge the gap to a wild heart that had learned only to expect pain. None of them knew if she would ever trust again. But in that moment, something in her posture shifted almost imperceptibly, as if she were allowing the possibility. By the end of the second week, the staff decided it was time to give them names. The young Bobcat became Sierra after the rugged mountain ranges of the Southwest. The yellow Labrador was named Scout for the way he always seemed to be watching over her. His black-coated brother became Shadow, the quieter one who followed Scout's lead. Names made them feel less like cases on a chart and more like souls the team had vowed to protect. One morning, Sierra was given a larger enclosure in the quiet corner of the facility. To everyone's surprise, they allowed Scout and Shadow to join her in the outdoor run under close supervision. Sierra froze at first, her muscles tight, her wild eyes darting from one pup to the other. Scout approached in his steady, measured way, sitting a few feet away without pushing. Shadow circled behind him, tail wagging hesitantly. Minutes passed, and Sierra's stance softened. She stepped forward, sniffed the air around Scout, then retreated a pace, but she didn't hiss. Scout leaned closer, his tail giving a slow, hopeful wag. It was the first time they had shared open space, and instead of chaos, there was a strange, quiet understanding. From that day on, the staff began a routine. Each morning, Scout and Shadow were brought to her enclosure for short, supervised visits. The pups would explore, play in the dirt, then settle near Sierra as if she were part of their pack. Scout often stayed pressed to her side, and when he wandered too far, Sierra would stand and pace until he returned to view. "Looks for him," one volunteer whispered, watching Sierra's restless steps when Scout was out of sight, like she's making sure her little brother's okay. And the bond deepened. Scout began bringing her sticks or scraps of rope from the play area, dropping them at her paws. Sierra, at first puzzled, began to bat at them with cautious swipes, her tufted ears tilting forward in faint curiosity. Shadow sometimes joined in, but more often he'd sprawl in the sun, content to watch this strange friendship unfold. To the staff, it was unlike anything they had seen. Sierra was still wild, her instincts sharp, her boundaries clear. Yet she had accepted Scout in a way that defied the rules of her species. She was the wild sister, and he, without question, had become her little brother. And when the two of them stood together, no one doubted that they would protect each other against anything. The change came on a hot afternoon when the air in the kennels felt heavy and restless. A new intake had arrived that morning. Muscular scarred pit bull named Rocco. He had been found roaming the outskirts of town, ribs showing under his short coat.